program. Things. It's okay. We got it. Policy areas, priorities that the commission wants to learn more about before it makes future decisions. We set quad 4 up to be a transitional quad. So really a big part of that's going to be learning more about what it might mean to go down further down some of the path of some of these transitional priorities the commission set. So on the left-hand side of that table, a number of order points came out of the final decision for quad planning related to emphasizing the program's ability to achieve greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So we've got direction that the program needs to set itself up to play a role in cost effectively reducing carbon emissions, play a larger role than perhaps it has in the past. To do more in terms of figuring out what the carbon emissions impacts the program is achieving. So how are we measuring it? How are we looking at that more granularly and taking into account the transition of the grid? Regarding electrification, the commission is interested in the program positioning itself to take on a larger role to promote beneficial electrification. So as you'll see in the research objectives for this study, there's a whole separate path looking at electrification opportunities. And order point 25 is carbon emissions value we adopted last year as a market-based value accepted by the commission. So that's incorporated. On the right-hand side, the commission also set forth some priorities to see what the program can do to attain more in the way of peak demand reductions. So we wanted some research performed to assess strategies for peak demand reduction. That's both on the electric and gas peak side. You'll see in the order points toward the bottom right. We had never done it before, but the commission directed the program to start measuring winter KW peak savings and winter natural gas impacts, peak natural gas savings. So these are all elements that are going to be incorporated into this study to set the commission up to make future policy decisions to understand where the program can go in achieving these directions. So there's a lot to understand for the program. These are new areas, and this study here that you're going to learn about today and to future meetings is going to help set the commission up for future program decisions, policy decisions related to these directives. There was a lot of other directives the commission actually set for the program that are not necessarily going to fall into scope for this project. This is a statewide modeling effort. Certain things that wouldn't fall into scope that are more program specific or qualitative or program designed to reach underserved customers. Those are going to be handled separately. They're not really a modeling track that we're going to look at specifically, but these things, emissions reductions, peak demand reductions, in addition to energy savings, are going to be on the core objectives of the study you're going to hear about more. So I think that was all I had before handing it over to Jeremy from Cadmus to walk us through the rest of the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Mitch. So this presentation, we have a lot to present. And so we are going to distill it down to the elements that are really unique and new for this study for the most part. And to illustrate what we are going to research over the next 2 years, we broke down the study priorities into a series of research questions. And we wanted to kick things off by first breaking down those research questions and going over how we will answer them with this study. And so these next couple of slides are a little bit text heavy, and some of the details about how we do things may be answered down the road in the presentation, but we wanted to lead with, hey, what's the study really trying to answer? And you can go ahead. And before doing that, at a high level, we also wanted to show what's the same and what's different from this study to the last 2 studies. So the dark blue boxes show the similarities. And then the lighter shading indicates elements of the study that are really new for this study, new to us. And so the commonalities are, we're still estimating the technical opportunity as the basis for making improvements to the building stock. We are developing a subset of that passes the economic screen. We are including energy efficiency measures, both gas and electric. We are looking at the human element of what might change in the market over 4 and 12 years based on human decisions. We're doing a number of scenarios to look at the ranges of possible outcomes. And we're also including distributed solar as a measure. Last study, we did solar as part of a separate kind of parallel study. For this study, solar will be in the mix with the energy efficiency measures. What is different is that we are developing another element of output for the study, and that's something we call program scenarios. So we'll take the opportunities that are available for making changes in Wisconsin, and from that, we will develop in consultation with Mitch and with the stakeholders and our technical advisory group, different program configurations based on the opportunities, the measures that are included, and estimate the really the program impacts. So we'll look at the budgets, the cost effectiveness of the program configurations, the emission impacts, the energy impacts, the demand impacts, and all that kind of stuff. The other new part is a much bigger focus on peak impacts and emissions. And that's directly linked to a much more extensive modeling effort that involves measure characterization with 8760 load shapes. So each measure that we include will have associated load shapes that we run through our model and compare to the overall demand forecast that we get from the utilities. So there's some really new and interesting and exciting stuff for this study. We're not calling it a potential study because it's really a planning study. There may be some terminology that carries over from previous studies, but at its core, it's really a planning study. And with the following research questions that we'll want to answer, if you can go ahead to the next slide. All right, so I understand this is text heavy, especially for people in the room. So I'll do my best to make this a little bit more conversational. So the first two objectives, as Mitch mentioned, was to understand how focusing on emissions and also focusing on demand reductions in program design could affect trade-offs. And so, meaning, what if you design a portfolio that is much more focused on emissions, what might that mean for energy? For example, we don't know, and what we're going to do is try and find out. And so those are the kind of first two objectives. And so these research questions really apply to each of these emissions and demand basically separately. But I'll just kind of read through these research questions, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we will answer them. So first question is, what are the 4 and 12-year emissions impacts of focus on energy program design scenarios? And so emissions and demand. And how cost-effective are potential market interventions designed to achieve emissions or separately demand impacts? How do future program designs compare to past program achievements? So how do they benchmark? And what are the measures that have the highest potential for either emissions or demand reductions? And so those are our research questions to address these first 2 objectives about understanding emissions and demand. And so when it comes to the impacts of the scenarios, what we'll do, and I think I already mentioned this, is to use data from the strategic energy assessment, from MISO and from the utilities, to do in conjunction with a 8760 characterization of our measures, to estimate what at a measure level impacts from these measures are in terms of emissions and demand to a much more specific level than we've done in the past. And then we'll work with you all and with Mitch to inform what measures go into our program scenarios. And then we will design the actual scenarios based on the different focus areas that the focus on energy might have, either on demand or emissions or energy. And it's going to be just a process of identifying what a program might look like that targets different outcomes. And then we'll run the scenarios and we'll see how the different program configurations line up. So that's number 1. We will also compare the cost effectiveness of different resources. So we'll obviously do a cost effectiveness screen on all of the different measures that we include and look at the results. But we'll also do economic potential. So all the measures that go through that are available in Wisconsin, either if they're used as a energy efficiency measure, or if they're used to electrify, and then we'll compare the cost effectiveness of those 2 options. So that gets at the cost effectiveness piece. Then we'll compare all of our results to the last full quad and see how they compare. And then we will also, what we'll really do is take all of our measures and stack them by what are the measures with the highest emission potential, what are the measures with the most demand reduction potential, which measures have the highest energy efficiency potential. And then what we'll be able to do is just compare how measures stack up when they how they stack up in terms of impacting different metrics. So that is for objective 1 and 2. I'm wondering if we should stop here or keep going. What do you think?
Yeah, and I realize I failed to mention the folks on the call, if you do have questions, you can feel free to type them into the chat and we can address them at kind of natural pauses in the presentation, or it's pretty informal in my opinion. We don't need.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
You mentioned the inputs, you're looking at ICA, looking at MISO data, those types of things, and when you're looking at, for example, and then thinking specifically about the consideration of the impact of trade-offs between demand versus energy savings. Can you comment briefly on how you're going to be approaching what constitutes demand savings from a timing perspective? Like what are you going to be looking at as demand reductions? What periods, what times, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, we haven't.
Jeremy, you might want to repeat it just in case the people on the phone didn't hear it.
The question was, how are we going to calculate the demand impacts using our load shape data and the utility load shape data? And I'll say that we're still dialing in exactly what that method's gonna be. We did request the utility peak period, how they define their peaks currently. We also requested their load shapes. But in terms of how, like if it's gonna be a dynamic approach, where it's purely based on the load shape, or if it's based on the peak period definition, I think is still a little bit up until we actually have a chance to review the data that we get. So I can't answer that question specifically yet.
We do have an officially adopted peak period definition for the supply, and we review that when supply using demand data from MISO to kind of see if the peak period is shifted or not, but we're trying to do it for the entire state, so individual utilities might have different individual definitions of that peak period.
To that, and maybe a specific thing is have you guys thought about incorporating MISO level definitions of, say, peak periods for resource adequacy purposes, or times with the highest loss of load probability, and those types of things into your consideration of how you determine, what demands savings are. Not to overcomplicate it in terms of thinking about what inputs you use to do this. And that's, I throw that out there just from the perspective of, on the utility side, that's obviously what they are building to meet, are those market level resource adequacy requirements, which may have nothing to do with absolute peak periods in nominal terms, right? So.
Yeah, and certainly those are things that we could roll into the next investigation into setting peak periods for the next pod, and I can also let Mitch speak to this.
Kind of out of my depth, to be honest, so I don't know that I have a better answer than anything that's been given right now.
Yeah, it's still, the methodology on this is still coming along. We welcome, you'll see our emails at the end, or you can chat with me, because we do welcome input. Go ahead.
So my question is more on intent than it is technique and methodology. I'm paying attention to the focus on emissions, the focus on peak reduction. Is your intent to take a look at what a typical energy efficiency scenario and set of measures might accomplish in those realms, or is it to go beyond that and understand what a program that focuses on trying to achieve peak reductions or trying to achieve emissions reductions would look like, and that would introduce a whole new range of measures? Can you speak to where in that continuum you're trying to go?
Well, that's a great question. So we're gonna use the existing focus on energy measures as a basis. But we'll have a whole session on measure selection, but we'll start with what's in the program, what might realistically be offered through the program. And then it becomes more of a question of what might the applications of those measures be. Specifically, do you try and really incent a heat pump to be installed in lieu of a gas furnace, or do you use it as an efficiency measure? So it's really the application of those existing measures, but we usually review, emerging technologies, to include. But really the core of it is gonna be what's, already successfully offered in the program.
And sort of related to that, through the program scenarios, component, it is the mix of measures, that are going to, look at, what a program could look like if you were focused on emissions or focused on peak demand. So that's gonna be part of that sort of the program scenario process. Could be a different mix than the current program or current programs offer now, or at least the incentives or the structure.
Yeah, and there might be some really interesting stuff, particularly in the industrial sector, given that much of the savings are achieved through custom projects currently, and it's a lot of them. So I think in particular the industrial sector, there might be some interesting new types of approaches, but I don't know that we can put those types of measures in a category just yet, other than a general process. Go ahead.
The MTRC is mentioned, are any of the other cost effectiveness tests going to be run on scenarios?
That's a great question. Right now, we're considering the MTRC as the primary test with, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but we'll have carbon cost scenarios on the MTRC. But I think the main test is gonna still be the MTRC. And for people that are scratching their head, trying to remember what's in the MTRC, we have a slide on that later. Anything on the phone?
Nothing in the chat.
All right, so we'll keep going. You mind please advancing?
I did.
Oh, you did, okay. Understand the implications for income qualified customers. I'll do this one really quick. The question is, what are the specific impacts for the customer segments? This is going to be very similar to our past reporting, where we report all of our results by income and have reported our results by income strata, and also by the kind of normal quote unquote building sectors and other types of segments. And then focus on what might happen if we focus on fuel switching / electrification. And just to clarify, for fuel switching, we're only considering gas to electric, not the other way around. To answer, so we'll ask the question, what are the relative impacts? And one of the really interesting things to do will be to run 2 scenarios of technical and economic, and compare the existing feasibility opportunities, and to also look at what might be included in the programs when they're focused in different ways, when more incentives are given to electrification, for example. And I think I captured the approach for question number 7 as well, so I think we can advance. Okay, so here's a slightly different flavor of objective. And that was to understand how the introduction of the federal incentives could change the landscape for, or I should say not could, but will at this point, change the landscape for focus. And so we will answer the question of, well, how much potential is actually being incentivized? So we'll map all of the measures that receive federal incentives and pull out what the potential is. That's pretty straightforward. And then we will also look at how might they change program design. So meaning through the program scenario process, we can allocate incentives differently based on if they receive IRA or not, or if additional state incentives might complement them and compare the outcomes. So it's really a technical feasibility question and a program design question, and we'll answer those through the processes that I described. You can go ahead, please. And then here, the last objective is to do contextualize the findings of the study. And I'll just answer all of these research questions in a couple of sentences and say that we'll include a benchmarking effort. We are going to pull out trends from comparable utilities in terms of cost and compare them to what we're finding with this program. So it'll be basically a benchmarking exercise. And I think that may have gotten us through the research questions. So you can go ahead. Maybe I'll just, it went kind of fast at the end. Any other questions?
We are gonna make the slides available, just gonna post them to the website, and the scope of work for the study is also on the website, so you can revisit these research questions that way as well after the meeting, if you'd like.
Okay, focus areas and reporting metrics. So this is, I think, a little bit of a recap. But as a recap, we'll estimate impacts on gas and electric loads for all customer segments that we're looking at. And we'll look at those from different program configurations, depending on how they're designed to focus on emissions or peak or electrification, and including federal incentives. And then we'll benchmark our results. And just again, as a recap, we'll include a much greater approach on load shapes. We are also going to do a much, well, we're going to attempt to more closely align with the program design and the Optum team on how we present and report out our findings and what measures we include. We're going to include or do a different type of adoption simulation to estimate what the market will do. And I'll go into some detail on that method, but it's fairly different from what we've done in the past. And the key is that it much more aligns with program design than in the past, where we have only included economically feasible measures in kind of the market. And for this study, someone can adopt anything regardless of whether it passes cost effectiveness or not, and that aligns more with actual program design, where you do include not cost effective measures, and you look at the cost effectiveness of the portfolio. And yeah, and I think we'll get to this next point also in the next slide, but to preview, I think we're gonna have much more fuel agnostic reporting. Because when you're comparing, say, for example, the impacts on gas and electricity from a fuel switching measure, it's actually not very illustrative to compare therms to kWh. It's much more interesting to look at something like a mgt2 impact. So we'll, it's a 2-year study. Some of this reporting stuff is down the line, but I think you can prepare yourself for much more fuel agnostic type of results from this study. You can go ahead. So this is a recap on our segments. So we include the main building. So again, really what we look at is changes to the built environment for this study. So it's not a surprise that our main way to segment outcomes is by building type. And so but we will break out the commercial sector into different types of commercial buildings, including things like government buildings or other types of institutions that might have different adoption drivers than kind of more standard commercial practices. And of course, we include industrial and agricultural sectors as outcomes. So I guess for ag, it's not all on buildings, but it's in and around, I would say, something that is built. We do also, and this is different than in the past, we'll present our results by utility service area, which we did for the solar study, but not for the energy efficiency study. New and existing buildings will report it out, and like I mentioned before, we do show results by income strata. And in terms of the impact measurements, I think I covered that sufficiently. I'll just add that we will also be doing gas peak for this study. So we're not only doing electric summer and winter peak, but we'll also do gas peak. And when it comes to our impacts, when we're talking about fuel switching, particularly, we're going to look at both the increases in electric use and the decreases in gas use. So that will happen both in terms of calculating the overall energy, but also for the emissions. So we'll take let's say the positive emissions impact from adding electric load compared to the gas reduction. Yeah, I think that's probably okay for now. You can go ahead. So we'll do 6 scenarios for our designs. We'll be having a whole session on defining those. And what we will want to do is vary assumptions about the market conditions, so we can vary costs and market acceptance of different measures, and we can also vary what's actually included in the program. And lastly, on this one, we think that there are gonna be two reporting periods to focus on. One is a 4-year, and that's gonna align with the quad. And then there's also a 12-year, which provides, I think, the longer term outlook of how the market may be shaped by different interventions in the scenarios.
And associated bill impacts, someone asks from the chat.
We are not going to calculate bill impacts. Go ahead.
Can you speak to what that statement means and non-program measures? What do you anticipate looking at there?
We don't know yet, but there may be measures that are not selected into the program. That are included in the study. So I can't hypothesize what those might be, but sometimes we do look at emerging tech in these studies that's not ready to be fully programmatic, but might have some kind of long-term impact.
And are those only showing up in the 12-year or would those all?
No, if they're part of the program scenarios, then they would show up there. It just, a lot will depend on how the program scenarios are designed, I think.
Okay.
So they may, if they're, like, let's say there's pilots that we want to include or not. Okay. So trying to see if I'm going too fast now. Well, just keep going. So here are our opportunities that we're going to estimate, and so this is a graph that anyone who's been doing potential studies or reading them for a long time will remember that we used to stack potential. So we would put technical potential as the feasible market cap on what you could achieve if you took every opportunity to convert a piece of equipment, right? So it's like the absolute cap. Not typically what can be achieved, but it provides the upper bound of what's possible. And so that's the term technical potential. And we have scratched our heads a little bit about how you do technical potential when you have a fuel switching opportunity, right? Because you could install a heat pump and have two different outcomes. And so what we, in terms of how it impacts the fuel load. And so what we decided is that we'll, to really answer this question, we will run technical potential twice. Once where every opportunity to upgrade a furnace is upgraded with a efficient gas furnace, and the other where every opportunity to update a gas furnace is replaced with a heat pump. And so technical potential will have two upper bounds. As, by the way, economic potential. Economic potential is just the technical opportunity, but only includes measures that are cost effective from the MTRC perspective. So then, and then economic potential stays kind of to the side and is important and interesting to consider, but it doesn't build onto our further blocks. The other blocks of potential or what we call, well, we're kind of getting rid of the term potential at this point and just calling it a like 12-year adoption simulation. And so what we do is take the measures that are available and run them through a human behavior model and with different assumptions about cost and barriers and S-curves, and we'll have a slide on that in a moment, and look at what over the 12-year period, the market may adopt under different conditions. And so that is the adoption simulation, which we formerly called optimized potential. In the last study, in the study before that, it was achievable potential. But it's really the decision making that someone who's faced with an opportunity might make, given different incentives or market drivers. And then we take that simulation, and then we will take that and look at the program scenarios. The program scenarios and the adoption simulation are going to be in a loop. So we might make different assumptions about program design. It'll feed into the adoption part. So the adoption simulation will not be static. And so, you know, the program scenarios are going to be kind of the core to answering many, but not all of the questions that we seek to answer with this study. And then lastly, as a reminder, we will not develop targets. We're here to help inform decision-making around program design. So it's not these program scenarios are not going to present necessarily a blueprint for what Focus should do in the future, but we hope will provide some very valuable information to guide the decisions for the next quad. Okay. Any questions on here before I go on? Yeah.
Is there gonna be like a business as usual scenario? From which we can kind of like compare. I guess some of the program scenarios too.
Yeah, I don't think we've quite gotten to the scenario design.
Okay.
But I think there could be. But yeah,
Okay.
I don't know yet how the scenarios might be configured, but I would encourage you to put a pin in that and bring it up when we do the scenarios. Any other questions? All quiet in the chat.
Oh, right in the chat.
Okay. This is purely illustrative at this point. But it kind of shows you the different data sources that we'll be using to estimate emissions. So we'll have our load shapes for all of our measures. And so when we stack up the adoption of all of the different measures over time, we'll be able to develop a kind of like hourly net impact for the different scenarios, for the economic and for the technical potential. And so we will be taking that data and then we will be combining that with some other really interesting data, including the utility load shapes, the energy production load shapes, or I'm not sure, supply curves. I'm not 100% sure what the technical term is, but basically it'll matter when different generators are producing. to calculate the emissions. And so we will be in the future presenting a much more specific approach to how our kind of net impacts will marry with load shapes and emissions profiles to get into our overall impacts. But it's something that we're pretty excited about. And we'll make use of some really good data, a lot of which will be coming from the strategic energy assessment that also will provide a really interesting window into how this mix will change over time. So basically, as the grid greens, how does the emissions impact from electrification change over time? So that'll be really interesting. You can go ahead. And then I think the last slide on adoption simulations here in terms of methodology, and again, this is a little different than in the past, but based on a model that we use in New York, there are to estimate the human element, we're essentially going to use our technical cap, and then develop a kind of an S curve, an adoption curve that kind of goes at a technology specific pace towards that market cap. And then and so we're going to be developing those S curves based on historical data. And then we can vary the shape of the S curves, but really what we're going to vary is the market cap that you diffuse to, and what we're going to inform that analysis with primary research in the Wisconsin market about what people are willing to adopt given different economic scenarios. So and then to define where we are in the current market, we'll use the actual current penetration of different technologies to say, okay, we're down here, or we're kind of in the middle. It'll really vary depending on the technology. Something that's been in the market for a long time is going to be much further along. Something that is brand new is going to be really have a low penetration, and also likely have a much well, it'll depend on the technology. Some new technologies take off through the roof right away. Some new technologies take quite a while to ramp up and gain momentum in the market. So that initial development of S curves that we assign to the different measure categories is going to be a pretty critical piece of how we simulate what will happen in the market. And this we spent a couple of hours presenting just on this approach to our technical advisory group. I know it's probably a lot to take in, but it's really meant to give you more of a flavor of where we're going, and there'll be an additional meeting where we can go much deeper into the weeds on how we will do this simulation. I will also say that where we vary the kind of like the point to which the technology diffuses, that's the lever where we include all of the different financial incentives that we can use to stimulate adoption, or not. So if you add, additional incentives, in our modeling approach, it'll raise the kind of cap to which the market diffuses. And then the last slide here, as promised, is on the MTRT test. This is our primary cost effectiveness test. It's the scale of cost and benefit. When, depending on the ratio of costs and benefits, it either passes or does not pass this test. On the cost side, we weigh the incremental cost of a measure and the program admin cost. And on the benefits, we essentially use the avoided energy costs and some non-energy benefits, including emissions. Now, this is very familiar to a lot of people. I think this test hasn't changed in Wisconsin for, Mitch is shaking his head, for a long time, ever. What the element of this that's new and really interesting is accounting for, again, electrification and fuel switching. So in the past, we've taken one energy supply cost in the benefits, but we will need to take the net of that and comparing the avoided or netting the lost gas to the increased electric. So that's really the only thing that's new. It doesn't change the test. The other part that's, I think, I actually don't think that doing sensitivities on carbon cost is new. We did that in the last study, but we will include a number of carbon cost sensitivities on economic potential for this study as well, and that's not part of the scenarios. Go ahead.
And for the netting, to compensate for the increased electricity, the reduced gas, that's everything but natural gas, correct? Like propane gas or,
Well,
cause I fuel switching gas, like natural gas to electric is not part of the program. So are you calculating that? But it's just not one of the offered program measures.
so
It is included, you can fuel switch from natural gas to electric, but
Okay.
you can. Technically can from unregulated fuels to electric, but the program cannot claim the reduction in unregulated fuel as a benefit.
Okay, I had this switch to my mind.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. Thanks.
So that,
Yeah.
we're not gonna include that as a measure type in this, because it's just been prohibited.
Somebody remind me what's modified versus just TRC and the modified TRC? It's what
The emissions benefit is actually the Wisconsin modification of this TRC, because the TRC as a general test doesn't include non-energy benefits. The commission has modified the TRC to include the quantified benefits from reduced emissions.
All right,
Has
so I've
a
always
number
been
of
using
flaws.
modified.
Yeah.
I think it's here, okay,
Yep.
got it, thank you.
anything?
Oh, not on chat, no.
Okay. Well. So we're moving pretty quickly. This is actually the last couple of slides on the study timeline. And opportunities to engage with us during the study. And this busy slide shows, I think what I would highlight is that we really have 4 overlapping phases for this study. we want one, at the top level, it's building the model that we use to do all these calculations. Which is taking our established methodologies, including the fuel switching element, which we hadn't included before, and taking a bigger data approach to the impacts modeling. So we do need to develop something specifically to do this work. And that's ongoing. We've already started that. That's a big job. And then in parallel with that, we need to characterize the market. So we have requested data from the utilities down to the customer level to estimate the existing loads for all the sectors. So that's important. That also includes, when we talk about market characterization now, it also includes the generation profiles and the demand profiles. And really what we do is we, to the granularity possible, try to say exactly how many houses, homes in Wisconsin have gas furnaces. Not only that, as we described, what state of what the rate of turnover might be, what the characteristics of that household is, what the efficiency of the existing system is. So it's a pretty big effort to really understand what does the building stock look like to a pretty small level of detail. So that in so far as we've requested the data has also started. And then that'll move into modeling. And that will also go into reporting. Now, what's not shown here is our data collection timeline. It's probably, we're probably looking for at early next year when we want to get into the field and start doing surveys with people about choices that they might make. But overall, it's a 2-year study. We have about 1.5 years left to finish it up by the end of next year. And if you go to the next slide, there are going to be more meetings. This meeting and the final meeting are probably the only ones where we come out to Wisconsin. But we wanted to introduce the meeting in person. And so the next meeting would be somewhere later in July to get much deeper into the different methodologies that we plan to apply, such as demand and emissions impacts and adoption modeling. Then we'll have a specific meeting about the measures to include. So we'll provide an overview of what we want to include, what we want to describe as, or what we propose to describe as fuel switching. And then we'll in the past, we've posted the measure list itself, and then people have had the opportunity to comment on different types of opportunities to include in the study or not include. It's typically trying to add a few things. What I'll say is that we'll probably have to scale back the measure list for this study a little bit because the data intensity of having an associated 8760 profile with like how many 1,500 measure iterations. Is a lot. And then really between when we identify the measures, and the rest of the study, until we get into the scenario design, it's really gonna be, our heads down and working on doing the modeling. And then our next meeting would be around scenario design, and that's where we can get into the weeds of questions like, should there be a base case, and what do these different configurations look like? And it'll be an opportunity for folks to weigh in on what the scenarios should look like. And then we'll take that information and we'll develop draft and final results, and we'll come back to present the final results. We do understand that between the measure selection and the scenario design is a period where there isn't gonna be maybe much opportunity to talk to us, but it's really because we're got our heads down and doing work. But we'll write a newsletter or send an email update of some kind, so that you guys know that we're still working on the study. Also wanted to mention that in addition to the stakeholder group, we have a separate advisory group that is composed of different technical advisors in Wisconsin. And we meet pretty regularly with them, and they get pretty into the weeds on some things. So we're sparing the stakeholder group the too many meetings, but are aiming to provide the opportunities to give input where it really matters. Any questions about the study timeline or engagement? Because I think the next one might be our last one. Okay, well, this is our last slide. We do have a website up. And I think, does everyone already get an email with the link?
If you don't receive emails, like if you didn't receive an email from me notifying you of this meeting, but there is a sign up form on that website. So, or find me after this meeting and I'll get you signed up, but that's an active sign up form on that website.
So we'll post all the materials that are available to that website, similar to the last study. We'll post the slides, we'll post things like the measure list, recordings, additional materials. We, basically all the related items to this study will be on that website. And you should always feel free to email us if you have any questions or concerns. Email's a good way to get a hold of us. And also Cassandra, couldn't make it, but she's on the phone. And she's been probably the person that most of the utilities are gonna get familiar with. She does a lot of the kind of day-to-day. Yeah. I think that's all I had. I may have gone too fast at the beginning, but probably okay to give you back 20 minutes of your day.
I have a question for Mitch. From a decision maker perspective, the results of this go to the commission for consideration. If we're only reporting on TRC, kind of provides the one perspective, albeit the one that we kind of considered primary in the past. Do they? Like, are the other perspectives from the other tests? Are they useful for decision making?
I'm trying to repeat that in case it wasn't heard on the phone. The question was if we're screening or looking at the impacts through modified TRC perspective for cost effectiveness, which is essentially looking at it compared to looking at energy efficiency compared to a supply side resource. Does changing the perspective of the test impact or potentially impact a decision for the program from a commission level in terms of where they would want to
Yeah.
direct the program? Is that
Somebody
correct?
saying, is this a good, should we pursue this? Is it a good idea to pursue it?
Uh-huh.
You know, some of these things are diversions from business as usual, how we've typically done things.
Mhm.
And we have a primary test to evaluate how we've always done things.
Mhm.
When deciding if this is a good idea or not, is it helpful for whoever's making those decisions to have those other perspectives at hand?
I mean, my personal opinion is yes, having other perspectives. I mean, the philosophy with cost benefit tests is you should establish tests that align with your policy priorities. So if policy priorities are such as this, we want to make sure that the cost benefit test that is using to gauge the performance of the program aligns. So I think it's useful from that perspective, whether not having a result equal X or Y on the different tests actually informs a commissioner's decision is not my call. I don't know. I think we always try to set it up in quad planning to say, if you want to take the perspective of this test is designed to do such a thing.
Okay.
I would assume that approach would continue going forward, having results that say a policy scenario that emphasizes this shows impacts like that one way compared to another policy scenario. From a energy savings, demand reduction, emissions reduction standpoint. I don't know that the actual test being used to screen is the most important piece right there, but I get what you're saying, where if emissions are prioritized, should we be valuing them accordingly?
Yeah, or even, some of the demand stuff, like. If it's like a marginal change to the PRC, but it has like rate impacts or something like that. Like positive rate impact. Like would then it be a more does then that influence the decision of. Saying this is a good idea or not a good idea?
And it's not my call to make, or whether it's a good idea or
No,
not a
I'm
good
not
idea.
saying it is, but I'm saying having that. Information, like if we're only gonna
Yeah,
run TRC on all this. Then
Yeah.
that's the only information that they have to make a decision on. Well, not the only cost effectiveness test is all.
in my time, there's never been a decision based on a
Secondary.
TRC
Oh,
as the
okay.
perspective type of a thing. It's always just been a policy decision. This is the perspective we think is appropriate for the program.
Okay.
But if we compare it side by side, the same scenario under different cost benefit tests, that could be informative for sure. Say, when you take the perspective of society versus the perspective of a resource. This is how they compare side by side. That, I mean, it's,
That's getting a lot.
yeah.
That's what I was getting at.
Just to add a little bit to that question, in the last study, we did look at a variety of economic scenarios,
Okay,
and a lot of it was varying different economic assumptions within the modified TRC. But there was also 2 additional scenarios of looking at the societal cost test as well as the utility cost
Okay.
test. But the main focus of those economic scenarios or sensitivities was primarily on looking at different discount rates and things like
Okay.
that, and different avoided cost drivers and things like that, but. The last study did look at those other two cost tests.
That's a good point. We have done this before and presented those results to the commission and that's never caused them to make any policy changes for the program per se, or to set any different type of direction for the program.
Okay,
It can be useful. It's a little in the weeds for a commissioner type level thing too. But, it's still informative.
Maybe somewhat related, but as a implementer thinking about electrification. And a lot of electrification projects are often like higher operational costs, than natural gas. Natural gas prices being so cheap. When we look at economically feasible, I'm remembering back to the first slide, right? We look at it from a policy perspective and the state chooses to consider, put a value on carbon. But that end consumer that I'm trying to convince to do that project, they don't have a cost on carbon. So like they don't, their cost test perspective, maybe Rick, I don't know, your
Yeah.
perspective of that. All of our historical program designs, and maybe this gets into that program planning, right, are designed to offset that upfront, that first year cost, assuming that there's a financial savings every year thereafter, there's like a return. Is that, I could see a measure that passes the modified TRC test and say, hey, this is economically feasible from a policy, a social perspective.
yeah,
But then I'm asked to go and design an incentive that somehow gets an end use consumer to do something that's never gonna pay off. Well, depending how you want to think, depending optimism on electric rates, right? Is that what's gonna be part of the program scenarios or whatever, like?
So the economic potential piece, there's really two places for it. One is kind of on the side next to the technical opportunity as an indicator of how much of that technical potential would pass this particular cost effectiveness
Yeah.
screen. And then the other place where it will show up in our results is when we take the program scenarios and we say, okay, this program scenario is got a cost effectiveness ratio of 2.3. This program scenario has a cost effectiveness ratio of 5.4. I'm just making up numbers, right? Like the cost effectiveness actually doesn't factor into the like decision-making part of the modeling. Because basically in our model, every measure is on the table for someone to install. There's a little bit of a like, I don't want to call it a participant cost test, but we do model the uptake from a participant perspective. And so, and we'll get into this in the methodology meeting, but if something looks really unattractive financially, it's going to have an impact on the likelihood that someone will pick it over an alternative. Now, I will also say that is specific to residential and commercial and agricultural, and the industrial part, which I think you're talking about,
Right.
is really a different beast altogether, because it is it's a bit more complicated on the industrial side. And it doesn't lend itself as well to an algorithm of that nature. So it's on the industrial side, it's a little bit more, I would say, qualitative, in terms of assigning ramp rates and whatnot.
From the chat, he says, I agree with this comment, so I'm assuming the last comment. With the attention on electrification emissions and demand savings, what is to prevent an outcome where the report encourages emphasis on measures that are efficient or high potential in net energy emission impact from these priorities, but are not likely to deliver net energy bill savings for the customer doing the project?
Yeah, what's the word? It's a recommendation or a,
if I understood it correctly, to include. I guess sort of more of a bill impact, if I understood that correctly.
Sounded a little bit like what you just spoke about, Jeremy, in terms
Yeah.
of a
It came
customer.
in before you were speaking, so.
Your customer has certain financial motivations to do something. And maybe their motivation is something not to save money, or maybe it is, but the measures that go through the model wouldn't reduce their bill. But would save energy.
Or save emissions. I mean, the better example would be like saves carbon, right? But then he increases their electric bill.
right,
That might pass because TRC test somehow, but no business. Well, I should say no business. It's a very different world to live in than the traditional buying down a project. It does have returns, just making those returns better. And how do you prevent recommending, saying there's a huge potential for that? And the results of the study and leaving us with like an impractical. And I'm trying to rephrase this first, an impractical mission, right? In practice on the street. Yes, theoretically, there's this potential. But practically on the street, we're not gonna be able to get anybody to do it.
yeah, and I'll say, and I always say. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just adding on to Nate's, just where carbon isn't actually monetized.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I'll say predicting human behavior is hard in a model. But the way that we will do it is by including the perspective of the customer that is both financial and non-financial. But the financial piece, and that's where, when I showed those S curves, where the market goes to is gonna be modeled on like how the customers perceive the return.
And just to note that return is looked at both, the lifetime of that measure, including the operational costs. So including the in a way that their bill impacts, right? So that's included in the.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah. Yeah, the way that we'll calculate the net present value from a customer perspective will include the avoided utility costs. We'll use the actual utility rates. It'll include the installation cost, it'll include maintenance. And that's, and basically all the things that a contractor might show a person when they're selling them a heat pump.
So if the net present value comes back as negative. How do you guys handle, like, from the ratepayer or purchaser's position, but it came back as positive TRC? What do you do there? Or is that not possible? I don't know.
Difficult because it would, in a lot of cases, you'd have to have a positive MMBTU. So the new technology would have to still consume more energy after installation, even after fuel switching. Is, you know, if you electrified a measure, in theory, you're deferring some other cost that the consumer would still have to purchase, whether it's natural gas or some other fuel.
Right,
And so you may end up in a scenario where electricity is substantially more expensive.
right, exactly.
But in theory, there also could be measure-specific benefits to electrification that are not quantified. And a lot of that can flow with like particular capabilities or operability. You know, a lot of sort of the more efficient equipment that's to also have smart features enabled.
Better control.
Better control,
Right,
more
stuff like that, right.
precision, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so in those cases, the net present value would be positive.
But it would be hard for the modeling team to be able to include all of the things that a particular even sector would want to value.
Right,
So that would be one of those things where we can see a set of measures and say, on paper, these look like they could, you know, have a negative net value if we only looked at the perspective of bill savings. But you could still sell them as saying like, oh, look at all these other functions and bells and whistles that would enable you to, you know, grow your functionality. And I think that's sort of limited to like large industrial and commercial.
right. All right, that's helpful, yeah. I was just very curious, the whole electrification thing is very curious. And I'm probably behind the curve, but it's pretty interesting to watch how this goes.
One of the things that we've seen in past potential studies, and has been sort of an issue, is the volatility of gas prices. And you can do a potential study, assuming a certain gas price, and then it goes through the roof, and then your whole study sort of falls apart from a cost effective perspective too. So like, how do you hedge? And how do you bake in gas price volatility? Because like some of these things, like you said, and you know, we see this even now with electrification, there are measures that are borderline, but because gas is cheap right now, maybe you can nudge that customer. Or excuse me, no, it's the other way around. It's harder for that customer to make that leap because gas is cheap right now, but if gas,
Build in an
yeah,
progressive non-escalation rate.
exactly. You know, electricity, you don't see quite the volatility, but with gas, you really do. And I'm just curious, is there a way that I interface some?
Well, I think it would be a scenario that you could do on different gas price trajectories. That's how I would answer that question, probably, is to suggest, you know, see what happens when the gas prices go down or up. That would really impact our simulation of what the market does.
Do you assume a range, or are you assuming current values are gonna hold constant for your 1 and 12-year periods, or is that TBD still developing that methodology? Let's come back at the next two stakeholder meetings and continue to ask about it.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head what we've done in the past. Maybe these guys remember, like, what our gas price forecast was based on.
I mean, usually we look at, for the Henry Hub forecasts, they're that's sort of our starting point, but you know, we could certainly look at different futures, right? Because they actually have different predictions, with that data set. So we could use that as a guidelines for our scenario. So.
I suppose to the person on the phone, did we answer your question? Okay. Or on the chat? You're still there.
Yeah. So on. I think it was a good discussion, yes.
Great.
That's all I got.
Any other questions?
You did it.
Yeah. Felt bad for a second.
Okay, well, I think probably good to close down the virtual side of the meeting. I appreciate everybody who hopped on. As Jeremy said, definitely welcome your input. Reach out by email anytime. Always happy to answer questions or have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.